Welcome, welcome, welcome. Haha. So you finally did it. You crossed the line they prayed you would never reach. They laughed when you were quiet, underestimated you when you stayed patient, and mistook your silence for weakness. But now, everything has changed. The same people who once ignored your presence are suddenly uncomfortable, nervous, and alert. Why? Because you stopped asking for permission to be powerful. Snorts, you embraced your ambition, your intensity, and that dangerous edge they couldn't control. You were no longer predictable, harmless, or easy to dismiss. You became the threat they warned everyone about. There comes a moment in every person's life when the old identity can no longer survive. Not because it was weak, but because it became too small for the future waiting ahead. The version they once knew was built for comfort, acceptance, and survival. It smiled when necessary, stayed quiet to avoid conflict, and tolerated disrespect just to keep the peace. That version knew how to blend in, how to make others comfortable, and how to carry silent pain without making noise. But every mask has an expiration date. For a long time, people became comfortable with that version of you. They studied your patterns, memorized your reactions, and placed you inside a box they believed would never open. In their minds, you were predictable, easy to read, easy to underestimate. They thought they understood your limits because they only knew the version of you that was still evolving. They met you before the storm fully formed. What they never realized is that pressure changes people. Disappointment sharpens awareness. Betrayal teaches observation. Isolation forces self-discovery. Every setback, every insult, every moment of being overlooked was quietly building something underneath the surface. While others thought you were standing still, an internal shift was taking place. You were learning, adapting, becoming more aware of your own value, your own strength, and your own capacity. Growth rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it happens in silence, in lonely nights filled with overthinking, in painful lessons no one else sees, in moments where you are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world around you. Transformation is not always glamorous. Sometimes it feels like destruction before it feels like power. And that is exactly why people become shocked when they encounter the new version of you. They are still speaking to an outdated identity. They expect the same reactions, the same tolerance, the same emotional access, but that person is no longer available. The old patterns are gone. The emotional weaknesses they once depended on no longer exist in the same form. Now your energy is different, more controlled, more intentional, less desperate for approval. You no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase spaces where your worth has to be negotiated. You no longer hand out unlimited access to those who treated your presence casually. This change can feel uncomfortable to those who benefited from your previous version. Not because you became cruel, but because you became clear. Boundaries confuse people who were once used to unrestricted access. Confidence unsettles those who were comfortable with your self-doubt. Discipline intimidates those who once relied on your inconsistency. The version they knew is officially gone. Not erased, but evolved beyond the recognition. That chapter served its purpose. It taught the lessons necessary for this next stage. You had to become that person before you could outgrow them. Some people will mourn the old you because it was easier for them to manage. Let them. Growth is not betrayal. Evolution is not arrogance. Outgrowing your former self is simply proof that you refuse to remain limited by a version of you that was never meant to be permanent. Most people experience rejection and immediately interpret it as a failure. A closed door feels personal. A missed opportunity feels like proof that they are not enough. They shrink, overthink, and begin questioning their own value based on someone else's decision. But there comes a point where rejection stops feeling like punishment and starts becoming information. That is where your transformation began. You learned that rejection was never always about your worth. Snorts. Sometimes it was about timing. Sometimes it was about other people's limitations, fears, or inability to recognize what stood in front of them. Not every closed door means you were unqualified. Sometimes it simply means you were not meant to stay in a space too small for your growth. That realization changed everything. Instead of allowing rejection to destroy your confidence, you started studying it. You stopped asking, "Why wasn't I chosen?" and started asking, "What is this teaching me?" That shift alone gave you an advantage most people never develop. Rejection taught you emotional discipline. It taught you how to detach from outcomes you cannot control. You learned that not every opportunity deserves your emotional collapse. Some endings are protection disguised as disappointment. Some denials or redirection wearing an ugly face. While others were busy complaining about what they lost, you were becoming sharper. Every rejection forced you to refine yourself. Every setback exposed an area where you could improve your mindset, your patience, your standards, or strategy. You stopped taking rejection as a final verdict and started using it as feedback. Over time, rejection built resilience inside you. The first few times it hurt deeply. It made you question everything. But eventually, pain became familiarity, and familiarity removed fear. You became dangerous the moment rejection stopped intimidating you. Now you move differently. You no longer beg for opportunities, attention, or validation. You understand that anything truly aligned with your path will not require you to abandon your dignity to secure it. This mindset creates power because desperation is visible and desperation weakens judgment. Rejection also taught you the value of self-respect. You stopped chasing people, spaces, and situations that clearly communicated disinterest. Instead of forcing yourself where you were not appreciated, you learned to redirect your energy toward environments where your presence actually matters. That alone separates you from most people. Many continue exhausting themselves trying to be accepted by places never designed for them. But you learned a harder lesson. Not all acceptance is valuable, and not all rejection is harmful. Sometimes being rejected is the greatest favor life can offer. It removes illusions, it reveals truth, it forces movement, it demands growth. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all was this: rejection made you independent. You stopped building your identity around external approval. You stopped measuring your worth through invitations, applause, or recognition. You became internally anchored. Now when rejection appears, it no longer breaks your spirit. It simply gives you more data, more clarity, and more fuel. What once wounded your ego now strengthens your focus. That is how rejection became your weapon. Not because you enjoy being denied, but because you discovered something most people never do. Every no can either weaken your confidence or sharpen your character. The choice is always yours. You chose transformation and clears throat. That decision changed the entire game. There is a kind of power that doesn't need noise to be felt. It doesn't arrive with announcements, dramatic speeches, or constant attempts to prove something. It simply enters a room and the atmosphere changes. Conversations become slightly more careful. Eyes become more observant. Energy shifts in ways people cannot always explain. This is what happens when your presence begins carrying weight. Not everyone understands this form of influence, because most people confuse power with visibility. They believe being loud, constantly seen, or endlessly validated is what makes someone impactful. But real presence operates differently. It is built through internal alignment, emotional control, and quiet certainty. You are not always like this. There was a time when your energy was more scattered, more reactive, and more available. People could read your emotions easily. They knew what triggered you, what distracted, see you, and what made you doubt yourself. Your presence existed, but it did not yet create tension because it was still searching for its center. Then life forced a change. Experience sharpened you. Difficult conversations taught restraint. Betrayal taught observation. Failure taught patience. Solitude taught self-awareness. Piece by piece, your energy became more intentional. You stopped over-explaining yourself. You stopped filling silence just to make others comfortable. You stopped chasing. Attention is proof of relevance. Instead, you became more selective with your words, your reactions, and your access. This kind of shift is subtle but impossible to ignore. People may not consciously understand what changed, but they feel it. They sense the difference between someone seeking approval and someone operating from inner stability. Your presence now carries an unspoken message. You are not easily influenced, easily manipulated, or easily distracted. That creates silent pressure. Not because you are trying to intimidate anyone, but because certainty naturally exposes uncertainty. When someone is deeply grounded, it can make others more aware of their own inconsistency, insecurity, or lack of direction. Your calmness unsettles chaotic minds. Your discipline highlights others' lack of control. Your boundaries remind people where they have overextended themselves. Without saying much, your very existence becomes a mirror. And mirrors can be uncomfortable. Some people see this energy. They feel inspired by it. They become curious about how you develop such restraint, such focus, such composure. Others, however, experience discomfort around it. They interpret your growth as distance, your boundaries as arrogance, or your silence as judgment. But often it is not about you at all. It is about what your presence activates inside them. Powerful energy has a way of forcing reflection. It makes people question where they stand, what they tolerate, and whether they are truly aligned with the image they project. That is why your presence now changes rooms without effort. You no longer need to demand respect because your energy communicates standards before your words ever do. You have become less interested in controlling perception and more committed to controlling yourself. That alone changes everything. The strongest kind of pressure is rarely spoken aloud. It is felt in pauses, in glances, in subtle shifts of behavior. It is the awareness people experience when they realize you are no longer operating from the same level they once understood. You became more focused, more disciplined, and more intentional. Not louder, not more dramatic, just harder to ignore. And in a world addicted to noise, quiet power is often the most unsettling force of all. People notice change long before they fully understand it. Sometimes they cannot explain what feels different about you, but something in their instincts alerts them. The tone of your voice changes. Your reactions become less emotional. Your attention becomes more selective. Your availability decreases. The familiar patterns they once relied on begin disappearing one by one. Even from a distance, they sense that something has shifted. Energy is not always visible, but it is deeply felt. Human beings are constantly reading signals beyond words. They observe posture, timing, focus, emotional reactions, and the way someone carries themselves through uncertainty. When these signals begin changing, people notice. Not snorts. You may not have announced your transformation. You may not have posted about your growth, explained your new mindset, or publicly declared a new chapter, but real change rarely needs advertisement. It reveals itself through behavior. The version of you people once knew was easier to predict. They understood your emotional patterns, your insecurities, and your habits. They knew what could distract you, what could trigger you, and what would pull your attention away from your goals. There was familiarity in that version of you, but familiarity creates comfort, and comfort creates assumptions. People assumed you would remain accessible in the same ways. They assumed your priorities would stay unchanged. They assumed your tolerance for nonsense would continue indefinitely. Then something changed. Maybe it was repeated disappointment. Maybe it was betrayal, exhaustion, or simply reaching a point where continuing the same cycle became more painful. Then changing whatever triggered it, an internal shift began. You started becoming more protective of your time, more aware of your environment, more intentional about where your attention was invested. You became less interested in reacting and more focused on responding with clarity. This shift is powerful because it changes your frequency. You are no longer emotionally available to every distraction. You no longer treat urgency as importance. You no longer allow every opinion to enter your mental space. That kind of change can be felt from a distance. People who have not spoken to you in months may suddenly think about you. Old connections become curious. Individuals who once overlooked your presence begin paying closer attention. It is not magic, it is pattern recognition. When your energy changes, your behavior changes. When your behavior changes, your social patterns shift. And when those patterns shift, people notice the absence of the version they once had access to. You become less reachable but more intentional, less reactive but more grounded, less concerned with proving yourself but more committed to building yourself. This creates intrigue. Not everyone will interpret your growth positively. Some may feel confused or even threatened by it. Your transformation removes predictability, and unpredictability makes people uncomfortable. They can no longer interact with you based on outdated expectations. You are no longer operating from the same emotional framework. Clear's throat realization can be deeply unsettling for those who became comfortable with your previous limitations. But growth is not meant to keep others comfortable. It is meant to move you closer to alignment. The most powerful changes often happen internally before they ever become externally visible. By the time others notice, the process is already well underway. That is why your energy feels different now. It is carrying more intention, more discipline, and more awareness. Even from afar, people can sense when someone is no longer moving with confusion. Clear's throat. They may not have the language to explain it. They may not understand exactly what changed, but they can feel it. And sometimes that feeling alone is enough to make them pay attention again. The greatest advantage you can ever develop is becoming difficult to predict. Predictability gives people comfort because it allows them to calculate outcomes, prepare responses, and maintain a false sense of control. When they believe they understand your patterns, they start treating you like a formula, something that can be solved, managed, and anticipated. They assume they know how far they can push you, how you will react, and what version of you will show up under pressure. For a long time, that may have been true. You were readable. Your emotions were visible. Your habits followed familiar cycles. People could observe your weaknesses, study your reactions, and move around you with confidence. They knew what upset you, what distracted you, and what would cause you to lose focus. In their minds, you were understandable, but growth changes structure. At some point, you stopped operating from emotional autopilot. You became more aware of your own patterns and more intentional about breaking the ones that limited you. You learned that repeating the same reactions gives too much information away. It hands people a map to your behavior. So you change the map not by becoming fake or dishonest, but by becoming less impulsive, norts, less emotionally transparent, more strategic with your energy. You stopped reacting instantly. You allowed silence to replace unnecessary explanation. You gave yourself space to think before moving. That alone made you harder to read. People who once felt confident around you now feel uncertainty. They cannot easily measure what you are thinking, what you are planning, or how you will respond. The emu predictability they once relied on is gone. This creates a form of psychological tension. Humans naturally seek patterns because patterns create safety. When someone becomes harder to categorize, harder to forecast, and harder to emotionally manipulate, it creates discomfort. That is what your transformation has done. You no longer move according to expectations built by other people. You are less driven by the need to be understood, approved of, or consistently available. You have become more focused on alignment than image. This can feel chaotic to people who were attached to an older version of you. Not because you became unstable, but because you became independent from their assumptions. There is a difference. Real chaos is not disorder for the sake of destruction. Sometimes chaos is simply what controlled systems call freedom when they can no longer manage it. Your unpredictability now comes from self-awareness. You are no longer automatically giving people the emotional responses they expect. You are no longer following outdated scripts. When pushed, you may be calm instead of reacting. When ignored, you may redirect your energy instead of chasing. When underestimated, you may stay silent and continue building. These choices disrupt expectation, and disrupted expectations create discomfort in those who once believed they understood you completely. The most powerful thing about this shift is that it was not created to confuse others. It was created to free yourself. You stopped living according to patterns that made you easy to control. You became more flexible, more adaptive, and more intentional. That makes you difficult to predict because you are no longer driven by habit alone. You respond based on awareness, not conditioning. And that changes everything. People are comfortable around versions of you they can define. But once you outgrow those definitions, their certainty begins collapsing. Now they are left facing something unfamiliar. Not because you became reckless, but because you became impossible to script. Most people spend their entire lives trying to appear harmless. They suppress every intense emotion, hide every darker thought, and convince themselves that being endlessly agreeable is the same thing as being good. They are taught to fear their own intensity as if power itself is dangerous. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. What makes a person powerful is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to understand it, control it, and direct it with purpose. Every human being carries duality. There is light, there is shadow, there is compassion, and there is aggression. There is patience, and there is the capacity for destruction. Clears throat. Pretending one side does not exist does not make it disappear. It simply leaves it unmanaged. Unmanaged darkness becomes recklessness, self-sabotage, impulsiveness, and destruction without direction. It consumes the person carrying it. But controlled darkness is different. Controlled darkness is discipline under pressure. It is the ability to feel anger without allowing anger to control your decisions. It is knowing you have the ability to be dangerous, yet choosing when and where to apply force. It is emotional intensity refined into focus. This is what separates ordinary people from unforgettable ones. Legends are rarely built from comfort alone. They are forged in conflict, adversity, pressure, and confrontation with difficult truths. Pain teaches what ease cannot. Loss reveals what matters. Rejection sharpens awareness. Betrayal teaches discernment. Each difficult experience introduces a person to parts of themselves they may have never otherwise discovered. Within struggle, people often meet their own shadow for the first time. They discover anger they did not know they carried, ambition they once suppressed, standards they once abandoned, a level of resilience hidden beneath years of adaptation. Many become frightened by this discovery. They interpret intensity as something shameful, something to hide or dilute. But intensity is not the problem. Lack of control is the problem. When intensity is not the problem, when intensity is disciplined, it becomes fuel. It becomes drive, conviction, resilience, and clarity. It allows a person to withstand pressure without collapsing. It gives them the strength to protect boundaries, make difficult decisions, and move through discomfort without losing direction. Controlled darkness is also honesty. It requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about yourself, your ego, your insecurities, your impulses, your capacity for both greatness and destruction. Avoiding these truths keeps a person fragmented. Facing them creates integration, and integrated people are difficult to destabilize. They are not naive about themselves or the world. They understand complexity. They know kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. They know patience without standards becomes passivity. So they evolve not into something cruel, but into something complete. A person who has learned to master their darker impulses becomes far more stable than someone pretending those impulses do not exist. That is why controlled darkness creates presence. It can be felt in the calmness of someone who no longer fears their own intensity, and the restraint of someone who knows what they are capable of, yet chooses precision over chaos. Legends are not remembered because they were endlessly soft, endlessly agreeable, or endlessly predictable. They are remembered because they carried depth, complexity, power shaped by awareness. They learned how to turn inner conflict into direction, how to transform pain into discipline, how to convert emotional fire into purposeful movement. That is the real power of controlled darkness, not destruction.